11 hours remained on the clock. Renket Sareth could see the countdown from where she sat, projected in pale amber numerals against the gallery wall of Tribunal Hall 9th, cycling down in fractions so fine they blurred into a continuous drain. 11 hours until the Veshrani Compact's exile decree against the Terran delegation became permanent under Article 71. 11 hours until the sealed archive was purged. 11 hours until the humans ceased to exist as a legal entity within Compact jurisdiction, and every right, every trade license, every protection of law dissolved like smoke through a vent. She pressed her thumb against the edge of the data tablet in her lap and forced her breathing steady. Around her, the tribunal chamber hummed with the indifferent noise of a body that believed the matter already settled. 42 adjudicators filled the curved judicial tiers, senior compact jurists, each appointed for life, each draped in the layered silver and black judicial vestments of the Veshrani legal caste. Their elongated skulls caught the overhead light from the glass dome, turning the ridged cartilage along their temples into rows of pale shadow. Most of them were not looking at the countdown. Most of them were reviewing notes, exchanging quiet remarks, or simply waiting for the session to resume so they could cast the final confirmation and go home. The humans had not appeared. That was the part that should have troubled the tribunal. Renkat believed it should have troubled them deeply. She turned her gaze to the empty respondents' platform, the half-circle of polished stone at the chamber's center, where a delegation was supposed to stand when answering charges. It had been empty for 3 days. The Terran envoy's chair behind it was pushed back, as if someone had stood and never returned. The water vessel beside it had not been refilled. 3 days of silence. Not a transmission, not a proxy filing, not a request for continuance. The humans had simply stopped answering. And the tribunal had taken it as surrender. Renket knew better. She was not human. She had never been to Earth, never served on a Terran vessel, never shared a meal with one of them. She was Veshrani, born in the mid-caste judiciary quarter of Orith Station, trained at the Compact's own legal institute, licensed to practice before the tribunal at age 31. Her specialty was exile law. She had spent 14 years reviewing cases in which species or delegations had been stripped of compact standing, exiled from legal protection, trade access, and the mutual defense covenant that kept smaller civilizations from being consumed by larger ones. In those 14 years, she had never taken a case. She had reviewed them, cataloged them, published 3 monographs, testified as an expert witness twice. But she had never stood as advocate for an exiled party, because the Compact's exile process was, in her professional assessment, engineered to make advocacy impossible. The timelines were too short. The evidentiary standards were too narrow. The tribunal's confirmation vote was treated as ceremonial, a rubber stamp on a decision the inner directorate had already made behind sealed doors. Until this case, Renkat had requested formal standing as advocate for the Terran delegation 6 days ago. The tribunal registrar had processed the request with visible confusion. It was, apparently, the first time in 40 years that anyone had filed one. The chief adjudicator, a severe figure named Doreth Mahan, had acknowledged it with a curt nod and a reminder that the countdown was already running. 6 days, 11 hours left now, and the humans had not appeared since day 11. The chime sounded. Doreth Mahan's voice filled the chamber, low, dry, perfectly calibrated to the acoustics of the domed hall. Session 14 of Tribunal Proceeding Compact Exile 4481 is now in order. The countdown stands at 10 hours, 57 minutes. The respondent delegation remains absent. Advocate Sareth, you hold the floor. Renket stood. She felt the weight of 42 gazes settle on her, not hostile, not curious. Indifferent, she was a procedural formality, an oddity. A junior jurist who had filed an advocate's brief for a species that had already stopped fighting. She picked up her data tablet and walked to the speaker's ring at the center of the chamber. Her robes, plain gray, not the silver and black of the adjudicators, marked her as an outsider even here, in her own people's hall of law. "Chief Adjudicator," she said, "I wish to enter new evidence." A murmur rippled through the tiers. Not alarm, amusement. One of the senior adjudicators, a broad-shouldered jurist named Teshek Vorn, leaned toward his neighbor and said something that made the other cover his mouth. Dorothy Mahan's expression did not change. "The evidentiary window closed at Session 9, Advocate. You are aware of this." I am invoking Rule 14 of the Compact's own founding charter. The right of an advocate to introduce evidence of procedural corruption at any point prior to final confirmation. The amusement and the tears died. Dorothy Mahan was quiet for 3 full seconds. The countdown behind her ticked down another fraction. "That is a serious invocation, Advocate Sorath." "Yes. You are alleging that this tribunal's proceedings have been corrupted. I am alleging that the evidence upon which this exile decree was built was fabricated, Chief Adjudicator, and I am alleging that the inner directorate knew it was fabricated when they referred the case to this body." The silence that followed was different from the earlier indifference. It had texture. Renkat could feel the tears recalculating, not the merits of her claim, not yet, but the personal risk of being associated with a proceeding that had just been called corrupt to its face. Dorothy Mahan folded his elongated fingers on the bench. "You have evidence to support this allegation." "I do." "Present it." Renkat touched the data tablet. The chamber's holographic display, a curved wall of pale cyan light behind the adjudicator's tiers, flickered and resolved into a document. It was dense with Veshrani legal script, stamped with the inner directorate's seal, and dated 41 years ago. "This is Compact Evaluation Report 2291T, Renkat said. "It is the original assessment of the Terran civilization conducted by the Directorate's Contact Bureau at First Contact. It was filed under restricted access and has never been presented to a tribunal. I obtained it through a formal records request under the transparency provision, which the Directorate took 39 days to fulfill, and which they fulfilled only after I filed a non-compliance motion." She let that sit. 39 days to produce a document that should have been available in hours. Several adjudicators shifted in their seats. "This report concludes," Renkat continued, "that the Terran civilization posed no military threat to the Compact, demonstrated no hostile intent, and met all 14 criteria for provisional membership. The Contact Bureau's recommendation was full integration within a standard probationary period." She paused. The chamber was listening now. The countdown read 10 hours, 41 minutes. That recommendation was never acted upon. Instead, 8 months after this report was filed, the Inner Directorate issued a revised assessment, Report 2291TR, which reclassified the Terran civilization as a Category 4 destabilizing influence and recommended preemptive exile. That revised assessment is the foundation of the decree this tribunal is being asked to confirm. She brought the second document onto the display beside the first. Side by side, the contrast was visible even at a glance. The first was dense with data, sensor analyses, cultural indices, trade projections. The second was 3 pages long. "The revised assessment contains no new data," Renkat said. "No updated sensor analyses, no field reports, no testimony from the Contact Bureau. It was authored by a single Directorate official, Undersecretary Kamaran Drow, and it was filed without peer review, without Contact Bureau endorsement, and without notification to the Terran delegation." Teshek Vorn, the broad-shouldered adjudicator who had been amused minutes ago, was no longer smiling. He was reading the documents on the display with his neck craned forward, his ridged temples catching the cyan light. "Advocate Sarath," Dorith Mahan said, his voice careful now, "are you alleging that Undersecretary Drow fabricated the revised assessment?" "I am alleging that the revised assessment contains no evidentiary basis for its conclusions, Chief Adjudicator. I am further alleging that Undersecretary Drow had a documented conflict of interest that was never disclosed to this tribunal." She brought a third document onto the display. This one was smaller, a personnel record. Undersecretary Drow's brother, Tomarin Drow, held the exclusive trade concession for the Verath corridor at the time of Terran first contact. The Contact Bureau's original assessment projected that Terran trade integration would open 17 new transit routes through the corridor routes that would have broken the Drow family's monopoly. Tomarin Drow's concession was valued at 400 million compact units annually. The chamber had gone very still. 8 months after the revised assessment was filed, Renkat said, Tomarin Drow's concession was renewed for an additional 30-year term. The renewal was approved by the inner directorate without competitive bidding. She set the data tablet down on the speaker's podium and let the 3 documents hang on the display: the original assessment, the fabricated revision, and the personnel record. 3 panels of light against the curved wall, telling a story that 41 years of sealed archives had kept silent. Dorith Mahan did not speak immediately. When he did, his voice had lost its dry administrative cadence. "Advocate, you are aware that if these documents are authenticated, the implications extend beyond this proceeding." "I am aware." "You are aware that you are accusing a sitting member of the inner directorate's legacy staff of corruption. Undersecretary Drow is deceased, Chief Adjudicator. He died 11 years ago, but the decree that his fabrication produced is still active, and as she glanced at the countdown, 10 hours and 29 minutes, it becomes permanent." Adjudicator Vorn raised his hand. Dorith Mahan acknowledged him with a nod. "Advocate Sarath," Vorn said, and his voice was rougher than she expected, the voice of someone whose certainty had been punctured. "You said the Terran delegation has not appeared for 3 days. If your evidence is valid, why are they not here to present it themselves?" Renkat had expected this question. She had rehearsed her answer in her quarters the night before, speaking to the blank wall of her cabin, trying to find the right weight for it. "Because they stopped believing this tribunal would listen." The words landed in the chamber like a stone dropped into still water. Vorn sat back. Several adjudicators exchanged glances, not the amused, dismissive glances of earlier, but the uncertain kind, the kind that precedes reconsideration. The Terran delegation filed 114 motions during the first 10 days of this proceeding, Renkat continued. Every motion was denied. They requested access to the original Contact Bureau assessment, denied. They requested the personnel records of the officials who authored the revised assessment, denied. They requested a continuance to gather independent evidence, denied. They requested that the tribunal acknowledge a conflict of interest in the directorate's referral, denied. She was not raising her voice. She did not need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. 114 motions. 0 granted. The Terran envoy, a woman named Catherine Asaro, stood on that platform for 10 consecutive sessions and made her case within every procedural framework available to her. She cited compact law. She cited the founding charter. She cited precedent from 11 prior exile proceedings. She was denied each time on technical grounds: timing, standing, scope. Renkat pointed to the empty platform. On the 11th day, Envoy Asaro stood, gathered her documents, and left the chamber without a word. She did not file a withdrawal. She did not make a statement. She simply left. The silence held. "I was in the gallery that day," Renkat said. "I watched her walk out, and I watched this tribunal note her departure as respondent non-appearance, and proceed to schedule the final confirmation vote. She picked up the data tablet again. What I did not know, what none of us knew, was what Envoy Asaro did after she left this chamber. A fourth document appeared on the display. This one was not a compact record. Its format was different, cleaner, more austere, with a header in a script that most of the adjudicators could not read without their translation implants activating. "This is a filing with the Orith Station Port Authority," Renkat said. "It was submitted by the Terran delegation's ship, the TSS Langston, 14 hours after Envoy Asaro left this chamber. It is a departure notification. The Langston left compact space on day 11. Murmuring in the tears. A departure during active proceedings was unusual, but not, strictly speaking, illegal for a respondent who had not been detained. However, Renket said, this is not the document I wish the tribunal to focus on." A fifth document replaced the fourth. This one made adjudicator Vorn lean forward so sharply that his bench-mounted console chimed a proximity alert. "This is a compact border monitoring report from the Verath Corridor Station. It was filed 6 hours ago. It records the arrival of a Terran vessel at the edge of compact jurisdiction, not the Langston, a different ship." She let the display resolve to full clarity. "The vessel is the TSS Harlan. It is a diplomatic courier. It arrived carrying a single document which it transmitted to the compact's general receiving frequency on an open channel, meaning every delegation, every trade partner, and every allied state within range received it simultaneously." Doreth Mahan's voice was tight. "What document, Advocate?" "A formal notification from the Terran government." "Shall I read the operative clause?" "Read it." Renkat looked at the display, though she had memorized the words hours ago. "The Terran Confederacy hereby notifies all parties that, effective upon the expiration of Veshrani Compact Exile Decree 4481, the Confederacy considers itself released from all obligations, agreements, and restraints previously undertaken in good faith during its provisional relationship with the Compact. This includes, but is not limited to, the Mutual Non-Aggression Framework, the Verath Corridor Transit Moratorium, and the intelligence-sharing protocols established under Contact Bureau supervision. The Confederacy further notifies all parties that it has completed independent survey and charting of 47 transit routes through and adjacent to the Verath Corridor, and that these routes will be open to all non-compact traffic within 90 days of decree confirmation." The chamber erupted. Not into chaos. The Veshrani judiciary did not do chaos, but into the rigid, controlled alarm of a body that had just heard the ground shift beneath it. Adjudicators turned to one another. Voices overlapped. Someone activated a console and began pulling up navigation charts. Teshek Vorn was on his feet, his hand raised, demanding recognition. Doreth Mahan struck the bench chime 3 times. The chamber stilled. "Advocate Sorath," he said, "you are telling this tribunal that the Terran government has mapped alternative routes through the Verath Corridor. 47 of them, Chief Adjudicator, and they intend to open them to every civilization that is not a compact member." The implications did not need to be spelled out. The Verath Corridor was the compact's economic spine, the single transit chokepoint through which 70% of interstellar trade flowed. The compact's authority rested not only on its military strength, but on its control of that corridor. Every trade partner, every allied state, every dependent colony relied on compact-managed transit. If the humans opened 47 alternative routes, free, unregulated, available to anyone, the corridor's monopoly would collapse. The trade concessions that funded the compact's operations would become worthless. The allied states that stayed allied because they had no other option would have options. The countdown read 9 hours, 53 minutes. "I wish to note for the record," Renkat said, her voice steady, That the Terran notification specifically states these routes were surveyed during the provisional relationship, meaning the humans mapped them while they were still seeking membership. They did not do this as a threat. They did this as a contingency. They prepared for exactly this outcome. Vorn's voice cut through the murmur. Chief Adjudicator, I move for an immediate recess to verify the authenticity of these documents. Seconded, said another adjudicator from the upper tier. Denied, Doreth Mahan said, and for the first time Renket heard something in his voice that was not procedural. It was the sound of a man who understood that a recess would cost time on a clock that was already running. The advocate holds the floor. Advocate Sarath, continue. Renkat took a breath. She had expected the recess motion. She had expected the denial too. Doreth Mahan was rigid, but he was not stupid. He could see the countdown. There is a sixth document, she said. The display changed again. This one was a compact intelligence briefing, classified, but obtained through the same transparency provision that had produced the original Contact Bureau assessment. It had taken Renkat 4 separate motions and a formal complaint to the Oversight Committee to extract it. This is a strategic assessment prepared by the Compact's own Military Analysis Division 18 months ago. It evaluates the Terran Confederacy's defensive capabilities in the event of a full severance of diplomatic relations. She could feel the room tightening. The adjudicators were no longer shifting or murmuring. They were reading. The assessment concludes that the Terran Confederacy currently maintains a standing fleet of 412 combat-capable vessels, including 31 capital-class ships. It further concludes that the Confederacy's industrial capacity would allow it to double that fleet within 14 months of full mobilization. She looked up from the tablet. The assessment also notes, in a footnote on page 11, that the Terran Confederacy has never conducted a full mobilization. The 412 vessels represent what the assessment calls peacetime posture. Adjudicator Vorn sat down slowly, as if his legs had made the decision without consulting him. The Compact's own standing fleet, Renkat said, is 309 vessels. The assessment recommends, and I quote, avoidance of any action that would precipitate Terran military escalation, as the Compact lacks the industrial base to sustain a prolonged engagement. She closed the document. This assessment was completed 18 months ago. It was distributed to the inner directorate. It was not shared with this tribunal. This tribunal was asked to confirm an exile decree against a civilization that the Compact's own military analysts have concluded it cannot afford to fight, and it was asked to do so without being told that fact. Doreth Mahan's hands were flat on the bench. His elongated fingers were very still. Chief Adjudicator, Renkat said, I have presented 6 documents. The original Contact Bureau assessment that recommended Terran integration, the fabricated revised assessment that a conflicted official used to trigger exile, the personnel record proving that conflict of interest, the Terran departure notification, the Terran government's formal notice of intent to open alternative trade routes, and the Compact's own military assessment warning against exactly this confrontation. She paused. The countdown read 9 hours, 21 minutes. I am not asking this tribunal to rule in the Terrans' favor out of sympathy. I am not asking you to admire them, or to trust them, or to consider them allies. I am asking you to look at what is in front of you and recognize that this exile decree was built on a lie told to protect one family's trade concession, and that confirming it will cost the Compact everything. She stepped back from the speaker's ring. I yield the floor and request a vote to suspend the countdown, pending a full evidentiary review. The chamber held its breath. Doreth Mahan looked at the 42 adjudicators. Renket could see them, the set of their jaws, the angle of their skulls, the way their hands rested on their consoles. She had spent 6 days watching this body, learning its tells. The ones who leaned left were uncertain. The ones whose fingers hovered over their voting panels were ready. The ones who looked at their neighbors were waiting to be led. "The advocate has moved for a suspension of the countdown," Doreth Mahan said. "Under Rule 14, a corruption allegation supported by documentary evidence requires a simple majority to trigger review. The vote is called." The panels lit. Renkat watched the count build on the display: green for suspension, red for continuation. The first 10 votes came fast, 7 green, 3 red, then a cluster of greens from the mid-tiers. Then a pause as the upper-tier adjudicators, the most senior, the most connected to the directorate, weighed their positions. Teshek Vorn voted green. His panel lit and he sat back, arms crossed, jaw set. The adjudicator beside him, a woman Renkat did not know by name, followed a moment later. The count climbed: 23 green, 12 red, 7 abstentions. Doreth Mahan's own panel was dark. The chief adjudicator did not vote except to break ties. He watched the count, his face unreadable. 28 green, 14 red. The chime sounded. Simple majority achieved. "The countdown is suspended," Doreth Mahan said. His voice was the same dry, careful instrument it had always been, but his hands had not moved from the bench. "The tribunal will conduct a full evidentiary review of the documents presented by Advocate Sarath. The inner directorate is hereby notified of a Rule 14 corruption inquiry. All parties are ordered to preserve relevant records." He looked at Renkat. "Advocate, you will provide authenticated copies of all 6 documents to the tribunal clerk within 2 hours." "They are already filed, Chief Adjudicator. I submitted them to the clerk's office this morning." The faintest shift crossed Doreth Mahan's features. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. The recognition of someone who had prepared every move before the session began. "This tribunal is in recess until 1400 hours tomorrow. Session 15 will convene for the evidentiary review." He struck the bench chime once. The adjudicators began to rise. Renkat remained at the speaker's ring. She watched them file out, some quickly, some slowly, some pausing to speak with colleagues in low tones. Teshek Vorn passed her without a word, but he inclined his head a fraction. She noted it. The chamber emptied. The holographic display still showed the 6 documents, glowing pale cyan against the curved wall. The countdown, suspended now, held at 9 hours, 18 minutes, frozen in amber numerals, no longer draining. Renkat collected her data tablet and walked toward the gallery exit. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even, but her chest felt as though something inside it had been clenched for 6 days and had only just begun to ease. She was halfway to the exit when she heard the voice. "Advocate Sarath." She turned. A figure stood at the gallery entrance, silhouetted against the bright corridor light that poured through the arched doorway. Human. A woman, early 50s, gray-streaked dark hair pulled back, wearing a plain dark coat over what Renkat recognized as a Terran diplomatic uniform. No insignia, no decorations. Just the coat and the uniform and a face that held an expression Renkat could not immediately place. Catherine Asaro, the Terran envoy who had walked out 3 days ago. Renkat stopped. "Envoy Asaro." Asaro stepped into the gallery. The light from the glass dome caught her face, older than the file photograph, thinner, with lines around the eyes that spoke of sessions endured and motions denied. She stopped 3 meters away. "You read the file," Asaro said, "not a question." "I read all of them." "The original Contact Bureau assessment?" "Yes." "The Drow concession records?" "Yes." Asaro nodded. She looked past Renkat at the empty chamber, the curved tiers, the vacant speaker's ring, the frozen countdown. Her expression was the one Renkat had not been able to place. She could place it now. It was the look of someone who had expected nothing and received something. Not gratitude, something harder than gratitude, the recognition of a debt that could not be spoken aloud because speaking it would diminish it. I filed 114 motions, Asaro said quietly. Every one of them asked for the documents you just put on that screen. I know. Every one was denied. I know. Asaro was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why did you take this case?" Renkat considered the question. She had asked it of herself many times over the past 6 days, in her quarters, in the records archive, in the long hours spent filing motions and drafting briefs, and preparing for a session she was not certain would matter. Because the law is supposed to mean something, she said, and because if it does not mean something when it is inconvenient, then it never meant anything at all. Asaro looked at her for a long time. Then she reached into the pocket of her coat and produced a small data chip, Terran format, compact, unmarked. "This is the survey data for the 47 transit routes," she said. "The full data set. Navigational charts, hazard assessments, capacity projections. We've been mapping them for 30 years. Renkat looked at the chip but did not take it. "I cannot accept evidence from a party outside the formal discovery process, envoy. You know this." "I do." Asaro set the chip on the gallery railing between them. "I'm not giving it to you as evidence. I'm giving it to you as context, so you understand what happens if the review fails." Renkat understood. If the tribunal's review found the corruption, if the decree was overturned, the routes would remain unmapped as far as the Compact's trade partners knew. The threat would dissolve. The Compact would reform its process, integrate the humans, and the Verath corridor would continue to function as it always had. If the review failed, if the tribunal closed ranks, protected the directorate, confirmed the decree, the humans would open those routes, every one of them, and the Compact's economic architecture would come apart at the seams, not in a war, not in a battle, in a quiet redistribution of options that would make the Compact's monopoly irrelevant. 30 years, Renkat said. 30 years, Asaro confirmed. "We started mapping them the day after the revised assessment was filed. We didn't know about Drow. We didn't know about the concession. We just knew the assessment was wrong, and we knew nobody was going to fix it for us." She looked at the frozen countdown. "We stopped believing you would fix it for us a long time ago, advocate, and then you stood up." Renkat picked up the chip. She held it for a moment, then placed it in the inner pocket of her robe. "The review will take 4 days, she said. "The documents are authenticated. The directorate will attempt to discredit them. They will claim the original assessment was preliminary, that the revision was a legitimate update, that the Drow connection is coincidental. I will need to anticipate each argument and prepare responsive evidence." "What do you need from us?" "Nothing. If the Terran delegation re-enters the chamber, the tribunal will treat it as a concession, an acknowledgement that the process is legitimate. Your absence is the most powerful statement you have made. Maintain it." Asaro's mouth tightened. It might have been a smile, it was hard to tell. "You're asking us to sit in our quarters and trust you." "I am asking you to trust the evidence. I am the mechanism. The evidence is the argument." Asaro studied her. "How long have you practiced exile law?" 14 years. "And you've never taken a case before this one?" "No." "Why this one?" Renkat thought about it. She thought about the file she had read, the original Contact Bureau assessment, with its careful data, its measured conclusions, its recommendation for integration. She thought about the 3-page revision that had overwritten it, the hollow document that had erased 30 years of a civilization's legal standing on the strength of one official's signature. She thought about Catherine Asaro standing on the speaker's platform for 10 sessions, citing law after law, receiving denial after denial, and finally walking out in silence. "Because in 14 years of studying exile law," Renkat said, I have never seen a case where the evidence of corruption was this clear, and the willingness to look at it was this absent. Someone had to look. Asaro nodded once. She turned toward the gallery exit, then stopped. Advocate. Yes. The notification we sent, the one about the transit routes. That wasn't a bluff. I know. If the decree is confirmed, we open the routes, all of them, within 90 days. I understand. And we will not come back to this chamber. Not to appeal. Not to renegotiate. Not ever. If this tribunal confirms a decree built on fabricated evidence, we will consider the compact's legal system permanently compromised, and we will act accordingly. She said it without heat, without emphasis. The way someone states the boiling point of water or the distance between two stars, a fact so settled it required no emotion to deliver. I understand, envoy. Asaro left. Her footsteps echoed in the empty gallery and faded. Renkat stood alone in the tribunal chamber. The 6 documents still glowed on the display. The countdown still held at 9 hours and 18 minutes, frozen. The glass dome overhead let in the station's artificial daylight, warm, even, illuminating the empty tiers and the vacant speaker's ring, and the water vessel on the respondent's table that no one had refilled. She opened her data tablet and began preparing for session 15. The next 4 days were the most concentrated work of Renkat's career. She had expected the directorate's response to be swift, and it was. Within 6 hours of the tribunal's recess, the directorate's legal liaison, a sharp-faced official named Karat-Un, had filed a motion to dismiss the corruption inquiry on jurisdictional grounds. The argument was technical. The original Contact Bureau assessment predated the tribunal's mandate, and therefore the tribunal lacked authority to review it. Renkat answered the motion before the tribunal reconvened. She cited 4 precedents in which tribunals had reviewed pre-mandate documents under the corruption exception. She cited the founding charter's language, which placed no temporal limit on Rule 14 inquiries. She cited the directorate's own procedural manual, which defined relevant evidence as any document bearing on the validity of a referred decree. The motion was denied at session 15's opening. The directorate's second argument was subtler. Karat-Un produced a memorandum, newly drafted, Renkat noted, though it was presented as a historical document, asserting that the revised assessment had been reviewed and endorsed by the Contact Bureau's deputy director at the time. If true, it would undercut Renkat's claim that the revision had bypassed Bureau oversight. Renkat requested the deputy director's signature file for authentication. The directorate objected. Doreth Mahan overruled the objection. The signature file was produced. It did not match. The authentication took 40 minutes. The tribunal's own forensic analyst, a quiet, meticulous jurist named Ashiv Paul, ran the comparison 3 times, then turned to the chamber and said, in a voice that carried no inflection at all, "The signature on the memorandum is inconsistent with the deputy director's verified signature file. The probability of authentic origin is less than 4%. The chamber received this in silence. Karat-Un's face did not change, but his hands, folded on the desk before him, pressed together hard enough to whiten the skin over his knuckles. The directorate's third argument came on day 16. This one was not legal, it was political. A senior directorate official, not Karat-Un, but someone above him, a figure Renkat recognized from the news feeds as Deputy Director Sholin Marath, appeared before the tribunal and requested permission to address the body directly. Doreth Mahan granted it. Marath stood at the speaker's ring, the same ring where Renkat had presented her evidence, and spoke for 11 minutes. He did not address the documents. He did not address the Drow connection. He did not address the forged memorandum. Instead, he spoke about stability, about the Compact's role as guarantor of interstellar order, about the dangers of undermining institutional authority on the basis of old documents and procedural technicalities. He spoke about the consequences of reversing the exile decree, the precedent it would set, the signal it would send to every exiled species and every discontented member state. He spoke about the Varath corridor and the trade architecture that depended on it. He spoke about the compact's obligations to its current members. He did not mention the humans once. When he finished, Doreth Mahan thanked him and asked if the directorate had any additional evidence to present. Mareth said no. Doreth Mahan turned to Renkat. "Advocate, do you wish to respond?" Renkat stood. She looked at Marath, at his careful posture, his measured voice, the way he had addressed the tribunal as peers rather than as a body he was attempting to influence. He was good. He was very good. And he had said nothing that was technically untrue. "Deputy Director Marath has spoken about stability," Renkat said. "I wish to speak about the 47 transit routes." Marath's composure fractured for exactly 1 second. It was enough. 3 adjudicators noticed. "The Terran Confederacy has mapped 47 transit routes through and adjacent to the Varath corridor," Renkat said. "If the exile decree is confirmed, those routes will be open to all non-compact traffic within 90 days. The compact's trade partners will have alternatives. The corridor's monopoly will end. The revenue that funds the compact's operations, including, I note, the directorate's budget, will be redirected." She turned to face the tears directly. "Deputy Director Marath has asked you to consider stability. I am asking you to consider what stability looks like when the corridor is no longer the only path. I am asking you to consider what the compact becomes when its authority rests on nothing but the inertia of habit, when every member state knows that a better deal is available, and the only reason they stay is because no one has shown them the door." She paused. "The humans have shown them the door. They mapped it, surveyed it, charted the hazards, and calculated the capacity. They did this quietly over 30 years, while this tribunal denied their motions and this directorate fabricated their assessment. And now they are standing at that door waiting, not threatening, waiting." She looked at Marath. "The deputy director is correct that reversing this decree will set a precedent. It will set the precedent that this tribunal examines the evidence placed before it, even when that evidence is inconvenient. I submit that this is a precedent worth setting." She sat down. The vote came on day 17. Doreth Mahan called it at the opening of session 17. After both sides had confirmed, they had no further evidence or argument to present. The question was simple. Should Exile Decree 4481 be overturned on the basis of procedural corruption? The panels lit. Renkat watched the count. She had stopped trying to predict it. She had presented the evidence. She had answered every objection. She had done what she could do. The rest belonged to 42 adjudicators, and whatever calculus of conscience, self-interest, and institutional loyalty was running behind their composed Veshrani faces. The first votes were green, then a streak of red from the upper tiers, the directorate-aligned adjudicators voting to preserve the decree, to protect the institution, to keep the architecture intact. Renkat counted them, 11 red, then 12, then 14. The mid-tiers went green, overwhelmingly. 21 green votes from the middle and lower tiers, the working jurists, the ones who had spent their careers in the evidentiary trenches, the ones who had watched a forged memorandum fail authentication in their own chamber. The count stabilized, 26 green, 14 red, 2 abstentions. Supermajority. The decree was overturned. Doreth Mahan announced the result in the same dry, measured voice he had used for every procedural ruling. Exile Decree 4481 is vacated. The Terran civilization's legal standing within the compact is restored, effective immediately. The Inner Directorate is ordered to produce all documents related to the original and revised assessments for full archival review. This tribunal recommends, but cannot compel, a formal investigation into the conduct of the late Undersecretary Drow and any surviving associates. He paused. Then he added, in a tone that was not quite official and not quite personal, the tribunal further notes that Advocate Sarath's invocation of Rule 14 represents the first successful use of that provision in the history of the Compact's judiciary. The provision was written into the founding charter 87 years ago. It took 87 years for someone to use it. He struck the bench chime. The session ended. Renket gathered her tablet and her documents. She did not look at the adjudicators as they filed out. She did not look at Karat Un or Deputy Director Marath. She walked to the gallery exit, her gray robes brushing the polished floor of the chamber. Catherine Asaro was waiting in the corridor. She was standing against the far wall, arms at her sides, watching the chamber doors. When Renket emerged, Asaro straightened. Her face held that same expression, the one that was harder than gratitude and quieter than relief. "The decree is vacated," Renket said. "I've heard. Your legal standing is restored. The directorate has been ordered to produce the full archive." "I heard that too." Asaro was quiet for a moment. "The transit routes will remain unmapped as far as the Compact's partners are concerned." "Yes." Renket nodded. She understood what Asaro was not saying, that the routes existed, that they were charted, that they could be opened at any time. The lever had not been removed. It had been lowered. The humans would keep it, the way a careful species keeps anything that has proven useful, not as a weapon but as a fact. "Advocate," Asaro said, "I need you to understand something." "Yes." "When I walked out of that chamber, I was not making a strategic calculation. I was not creating leverage. I was not performing for an audience." Her voice was very even. "I walked out because I had exhausted every legal remedy available to me, and not one of them had worked. I walked out because I was finished, because I believed this tribunal would never look at the evidence, because I had accepted that the decree would be confirmed and that my government would respond accordingly." She met Renket's eyes. "You changed the outcome, not the evidence. The evidence existed for 40 years. You changed the fact that someone was willing to put it on the screen." Renket did not know what to say to that. She was not accustomed to being thanked for doing what the law required. She had not done it for the humans. She had done it because the documents were there and no one was reading them, and the countdown was running, and the law said someone could invoke Rule 14, and in 87 years no one had. "I will file the authenticated archive with the tribunal clerk by end of day," she said. "The directorate investigation will take months. You will need to appoint a liaison to coordinate with the review panel." "Already done." Asaro reached into her coat pocket. She produced a folded document, physical paper, which Renket had not seen in a government context in years. She offered it. Renket took it and unfolded it. It was a formal appointment letter from the Terran Confederacy's diplomatic corps, printed on paper stock with a watermark she did not recognize. It appointed Renket Sarath, by name, in full, as independent legal counsel to the Terran delegation for all proceedings related to Decree 4481 and its aftermath. The letter was dated 4 days ago, day 13, the day after Renket had filed her advocate's brief, before the evidence had been presented, before the vote, before any of it. Asaro watched her read it. "You prepared this before you knew the outcome," Renket said. "We prepared it the day you filed the brief. You did not know I would succeed." "No, but you filed. In 40 years, you were the first one who filed." Renket folded the letter and placed it inside her robe, beside the data chip she had not yet returned. "I will consider the appointment," she said. "Take your time." Asaro turned and walked down the corridor. Her stride was unhurried, the stride of someone who had nowhere to be and no urgency to project. She did not look back. Renkat stood in the corridor outside Tribunal Hall 9th. Through the arched windows, the station's artificial sky showed a pale, even blue, the same color it always showed, the same light it always cast. Inside the chamber behind her, the countdown display had been deactivated. The 6 documents had been cleared from the holographic wall and archived. The adjudicator's consoles were dark. The water vessel on the respondent's table had been refilled. She noticed it through the open chamber door, someone from the maintenance staff, probably, restoring the chamber to its default state for the next proceeding. A small thing. A glass vessel filled with clean water placed beside a chair where someone would eventually sit. Renkat looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward the records archive. She had 4 days of documentation to file, a directorate investigation to prepare for, and a formal appointment letter to read again in the quiet of her office. The countdown was finished, the work was not.